I'm seeking advice on how to salvage what's left of my marriage. To maintain privacy, I'll use the name James for my husband. Our journey began during our second year of community college. I completed a 2-year degree in office management, while James pursued a 4-year degree in business administration from a university that offered remote classes at the community college. Currently, I'm 26 years old, and James is 27. We had plans to start a family later this year, envisioning 4 kids, ideally 2 boys and 2 girls. Our marriage was a happy one, and both our families held us in high regard. However, here's where I made a terrible mistake. I formed a close relationship, which some might label a work husband, but in my situation, it was with a delivery driver from one of the major delivery companies who frequently visited our office. Let's call this person Jaden for confidentiality reasons. Jaden, 25 years old and single, had been delivering to my workplace for nearly 2 years. From our first meeting, there was a certain chemistry between us. Not necessarily romantic, but an undeniable connection. I felt drawn to him, and every time he made a delivery, we'd engage in conversations lasting at least 10 minutes. I eagerly anticipated his visits and made sure to be at the front when he arrived. One day, our conversation took a different turn. Jaden approached me with a personal question, expressing concern about offending me or affecting our professional relationship. I reassured him and encouraged him to ask. Jaden then revealed, "I feel a strong attraction to you and wondered if you felt the same way." I was taken aback by his boldness, which left me feeling somewhat embarrassed. After taking a moment to collect my thoughts, I decided to be honest with him. I admitted that I also felt a connection. Jaden then mentioned that he would have asked me out if I weren't married. I graciously accepted the compliment, and our conversation ended. He left, and that was the end of it. In the following week, our interactions were brief and awkward whenever he delivered packages. I was deeply concerned and plagued by guilt, fearing I might have crossed a line. Back at home, James and I were happily married. Let me emphasize that I had always been completely content with James as my lover, friend, and husband, and I believe he felt the same way about me. He was the perfect match for me. However, foolishly, I began to entertain thoughts of selfishly having both my loving husband and some kind of relationship with Jaden beyond our work-related chats. Later, I learned that this behavior is sometimes referred to as being a cake eater. I started to explore this concept and stumbled upon articles about polyamory and open marriages. Initially, I found these ideas strange and unappealing, so I didn't dwell on them. I also knew that my husband would never agree to such an arrangement, and even if he did, it could harm our marriage and strain relationships with our families. I didn't want any of that to happen. However, weeks passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about forming a connection with Jaden. I resumed my research on the topic and came across a blog post titled, "It Doesn't Hurt to Ask." In this post, a woman claimed to have a successful open marriage. She shared her experience of loving her husband, but also desiring a relationship with a man she met while volunteering. The blogger mentioned that she struggled to broach the topic with her husband without causing harm to their marriage. She kept these emotions bottled up for more than 2 years. Then, during a lengthy drive one day, she decided to inquire about it. Surprisingly, he showed a lot of interest. In short, they opened up their marriage and both now have partners outside of their marriage, meeting them 3 to 4 times a month. According to the blogger, they've been doing this for 4 years, and their marriage is now stronger, and they're both happier than ever. Her story grabbed my attention because it aligned with my desires, but I had been too apprehensive to discuss it with my husband. Then one Sunday morning, while we were relaxing at home, browsing the web on our phones and casually chatting, I decided to bring up the topic and asked him directly, "I just read an online post about open marriages. What are your thoughts on that?" He inquired if I was referring to couples being involved with other people. I confirmed and asked for his opinion again. He expressed disgust and believed that people should just get divorced if they want to be with others. I mentioned that it's gaining popularity in the US and many Western countries. James's facial expression indicated his revulsion towards the subject, so I swiftly changed the topic. Based on his reaction, I decided never to broach the subject again because the last thing I wanted was to jeopardize our otherwise great marriage. A couple of weeks passed, and James and I were cuddling in bed after a passionate moment of closeness. I lay on his chest, unable to see his face, when out of nowhere he asked, "Who were you thinking of when you brought up open marriages last week?" I was taken aback, feeling a pit in my stomach. Slowly raising my head and looking at him, I replied, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" James then revealed that he had come across research suggesting that when a woman brings up the idea of an open relationship to her partner, it often means she's already cheated or has someone else in mind. His revelation stunned me, deeply shaking me. James noticed the impact of his words and said, "I know you too well. I can sense you're hiding something. So be honest." I fell silent, averted my gaze, and eventually confessed that I had never cheated on him and had no intentions of doing so. I could have stopped there, but I continued, admitting that if we were to ever consider an open marriage, there was a colleague at work who I might consider. James inquired, "Tell me about this work friend." So I began explaining about Jaden and our interactions up to that point, including Jaden's feelings, but I didn't reveal that I had reciprocated those feelings. James's next words alarmed me. He said, "Technically, you've already cheated on me." I felt irritated and responded defiantly, insisting that I hadn't. However, he countered, "Yes, what you have with this Jaden guy is often referred to as an emotional affair." I had never encountered this concept before, so James provided an explanation. Growing increasingly frustrated, I reluctantly agreed to halt the conversation for the night as he needed to get some rest for an early start the next day. He quickly drifted off to sleep, but I couldn't. Instead, I reached for my phone and delved into researching emotional affairs, reading various articles and posts about them. James was correct. What I shared with Jaden dangerously bordered on being an emotional affair, or rather, it had fully become one. I felt terrible, as if I had betrayed my husband. Unable to sleep, I left the bed, went downstairs, and brewed myself some tea. I eventually drifted off to sleep on the couch around 4 a.m. At approximately 6:45 a.m., James roused me with a kiss, letting me know he was heading to work, and it was nearly 7 a.m., signaling it was time for me to start my day. As usual, I returned his affection and told him I loved him. However, this time I placed even more emphasis on my feelings, though my mind was clouded with guilt regarding Jaden. Several days passed, and once again we were lying in bed after being intimate when James suddenly mentioned that he'd be open to the idea of an open marriage if it was something I truly desired. I was taken aback and asked, "Why are you bringing this up now?" He explained that he had been contemplating our discussions and thought that if we were interested, we should give it a try while we were still young. I showed interest but made it clear that I would never jeopardize our marriage or the love we shared, as he was the most important person in my life. James responded by saying, "If our love is strong, it will endure even if infidelity is involved." I countered by pointing out that a mutual open relationship wouldn't be considered infidelity, since we would both be consenting to it. Instead of commenting on that, he simply stated, "Let's consider our marriage open, starting from this moment." Once again, I was taken aback and urged him to slow down, emphasizing the need to establish some ground rules. He specified that the only ground rules he wanted were, 1. We had to inform each other in advance about our intentions to be intimate with someone else. 2. We had to share the details afterward without going into explicit specifics. And 3. We must always use protection, with no exceptions. I agreed to his terms and suggested a couple more conditions. 4. That we would keep our open marriage private, and 5. We would make a mutual promise that these outside relationships wouldn't harm our marriage, and we would remain together. James expressed his inability to accept either of these conditions. When I inquired why, he simply stated that he couldn't and wouldn't agree to these terms, and preferred not to delve into it further. This left me feeling quite uneasy, as it was unlike James. However, I snuggled up to him, and we eventually drifted off to sleep. My conversations with James had left me unsettled about the whole open relationship idea, as if he had some hidden agenda. So, for the following month, I refrained from pursuing the open relationship and we carried on with our normal lives. During this period, I distanced myself from Jaden at work, engaging in only brief, superficial chats about topics like the weather and how busy we both were. Then, one day, Jaden expressed how much he missed our conversations and asked if something was bothering me. I told him that I had been swamped with work both at the office and at home lately, leaving me with little time for conversation. In my mind, I contemplated whether I should disclose my open marriage to him. Ultimately, I decided to do so. And oh, how I wish I could reverse that decision. It didn't feel appropriate to have this conversation at work, so instead, I invited him to meet for a drink after work that day, and he agreed. We met at a local bar with an outdoor patio, perfect for the warm, early spring weather. I revealed my recently opened marriage to him and directly asked if he would be interested in a romantic relationship with me. Without hesitation, he replied with a yes, explaining that he had been patiently waiting for me to make a move and hadn't pressured me out of respect. He also mentioned having dreams about me for several months. During our meeting, most of our conversation had a flirtatious tone. It happened on a Tuesday, and we agreed to have our first romantic encounter at his apartment the following day, right after work. However, I made it clear that I needed to leave by 6:30 p.m. to return home to my husband, who remained my top priority. That evening, I went back home and prepared a delightful dinner for James. After we had dinner, I talked to him about my conversation and meeting with Jaden earlier that day. We had scheduled a date for the next day after work at Jaden's place, but only if James was still comfortable with our open marriage plan. His response was somewhat surprised. "Oh, okay, so you're going to meet him tomorrow?" I confirmed, but I assured him that we could still cancel if he wasn't okay with it, emphasizing that he and our relationship were my primary concerns. He responded, "No, let's go ahead with it." We hugged, but his embrace felt stiff and distant, unlike our usual warm embraces. I attributed it to nerves. That evening, we didn't talk much because he was busy with work in his home office, and I had tasks of my own in my home office. When we went to bed, I tried to initiate something by cuddling with him, but he mentioned that he was too tired and needed rest. The next morning, when I woke up, James had already left. He left a text explaining that he had an early meeting, which he had forgotten to tell me about, and he mentioned that he'd see me that night. This was unusual for him, but I didn't dwell on it and continued with my usual routine of getting ready and going to work. I picked out a cute outfit that day, knowing that Jaden and I were going to meet right after work. Throughout the day, I sent messages to James but received no responses. I started to contemplate canceling my date with Jaden once again. Looking back on my story, I truly wish I had. Then, at 4:17 p.m., I received a text from James. He sent a message expressing his love and confirming our plans to see each other that night. This message provided me with a sense of relief, and I interpreted it as his approval to proceed. Now let's get right to it. Jaden and I met, and the closeness was enjoyable. It didn't quite match the level of satisfaction I have with James, and there were no feelings of love involved. However, it was fulfilling, mostly due to the intense desire and the forbidden nature of our actions. I left his place after about an hour and a half, arriving home just after 6:40 p.m. To my surprise, James wasn't home yet. I didn't mind, as it gave me the opportunity to shower and toss my clothes in the washing machine to get rid of the scent of Jaden's cologne. I didn't want James to notice it. Despite the fulfillment, I carried a deep sense of guilt, shame, and remorse. I felt unclean and had a significant internal struggle, making me quite nervous. I decided to quickly prepare a nice dinner for James, lighting some candles to set a romantic atmosphere. I wanted to ensure he understood how much I loved him, and that closeness with Jaden meant absolutely nothing to me. It was purely physical, and nowhere near the level of emotional and satisfaction I experienced with him. I was hoping our evening would end with closeness. I understand some of you might find this selfish and unpleasant, but please remember that I took precautions during my encounter with Jaden, and no body contact of any kind occurred. By 7:30 p.m., James still hadn't returned home. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, so I sent him a text message, letting him know I was home and had dinner ready. However, I received no response from him. As it approached 8:50 p.m., I started to worry. I continued calling, leaving messages, and sending texts. Around 9:30 p.m., I received a text from him saying not to wait up, as he would be home late. I responded by asking where he was and who he was with, but he didn't reply. I was completely worn out and fell asleep sometime after midnight. I woke up to the sound of the shower running in the spare bathroom and decided to investigate. The door was locked, which was unusual for James. I knocked, but he didn't respond. About 10 minutes later, James came out with a towel around him and casually asked me how my night was. I told him it was fine, but then he directly inquired, "Did you have an intimate encounter with Jaden?" I requested that he not use that term, but I admitted that yes, Jaden and I had been together. I then asked him where he had been. He explained that he had spent the night at several bars and had gone dancing. I questioned who he was with since I could detect the scent of perfume on his discarded clothes. I inquired, "Who is this, her?" He said that since they hadn't been close, he didn't feel the need to tell me who she was. I can't repeat his exact words here, but I can say that he never used offensive language with me. However, his way of speaking and the choice of words left me very concerned. I then asked him why he had used the guest bathroom to shower, and he informed me that he would be using the guest bedroom and bathroom until I took 2 STD tests. His words crushed me, and I replied, "What? This wasn't part of our agreement. I made sure Jaden used protection for everything we did." He responded, "Haven't you heard of oral HPV or oral herpes? I won't be within 6 feet of you until you're cleared. Consider it my version of social distancing." I was incredibly upset and in tears. I told James that I wanted to end our open marriage because this was the last thing I had wanted to happen. James responded, "No way. You had your opportunity, and now it's my turn." Upset and still crying, I watched as he simply stated that he was going to bed due to an early meeting and the need for rest. I spent most of the night crying, eventually falling asleep on the couch. When I woke up, James had already left. He sent me a text saying not to wait up for him. I tried calling him, but he didn't answer. I sent texts and left messages all day, but he never replied. I felt sick and like I was losing my mind, thinking I might have ruined my marriage. We didn't have any deliveries that day, so I didn't see Jaden. However, I called him at 4:30 p.m. and asked if we could meet later. He agreed and noticed that I sounded upset. I admitted I was and said we could discuss it when I got to his place. We met and I told him I wanted to end our relationship. I confessed that it was a huge mistake because I loved my husband and wanted only him. I explained the situation, and he understood. The only thing he requested was one more encounter, after which he'd only interact with me for work. I agreed, and we had a very brief encounter, just a simple short moment that lasted less than 10 minutes. Afterward, he commented, "That was terrible. You just laid there like a tree trunk." I apologized, acknowledging that this whole thing was a huge mistake and it wasn't his fault. I got dressed, gave him one last hug, and left. Before I left, Jaden said, "I'll never understand women like you." I asked him what he meant by that comment, and he simply replied, "Nothing, no comment," with a disgusted look on his face. I drove home crying the entire way. How could I be so foolish? I wrecked my marriage, and for what? For absolutely nothing. I felt like the most idiotic person on the planet, and once again, I just felt tainted. James didn't return home until 1 a.m. that night. I felt terrible, knowing that I had single-handedly ruined my life. On Friday, James did the same thing, leaving before I even woke up and sending me a text that said, "Don't wait up for me." The emotional distance and coldness were devastating to me. I loved spending time with my husband in the mornings, evenings, and weekends, preparing his meals, cuddling, going for walks after dinner, and just having silly conversations. All of that was gone, and I missed it terribly. I texted James and said I wanted to talk to him the next morning, and he replied, "Okay, as long as it's early because I'm leaving for the day." I asked him where he was going, but he didn't respond. He didn't return home until 1:30 a.m. I didn't say anything. I just lay in bed crying. Once again, he took a shower and went straight to bed. I woke up early, waiting for James to get up. He came into the kitchen at 7 a.m. and poured some orange juice. The atmosphere was chilly and devoid of emotion. He avoided eye contact and sat down at the table with me, engrossed in his phone. I got up and sat on his lap, saying, "Look at me." He turned his gaze away, but I insisted, "Look at me," gently holding his face and gazing into his brown eyes. I told him that I loved him with all my heart and that I had made a terrible decision, not just a mistake, but a terrible decision. I apologized and expressed my willingness to do anything to regain his trust and love. He remained silent, looking at me as if I were insane. I asked him if he loved me, and he didn't respond. I pleaded, "James, please answer me." He said he wasn't sure. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I told him, "I can make things right." He responded, "I don't think you can." In frustration, I called him a jerk and accused, "You planned all of this. You wanted to divorce me, didn't you?" He denied planning it, but admitted that when I brought up the idea of an open marriage, he sensed our marriage might be doomed based on what he'd read. I asked him why he didn't just put his foot down and insist I cut off all contact with Jaden. He replied, You can't force someone to be faithful. Either you are or you're not, and it seems you're not inclined to be monogamous. I sobbed, telling him I was, and begged him not to give up on us. He remained silent, got up, and said he was leaving. I inquired about his destination, and he mentioned he'd be back after midnight. I reminded him that tomorrow was Easter Sunday, and we were supposed to leave at 7 a.m. to visit my parents. My family adores my husband, and we spend nearly every holiday with them since his parents live in Florida now. He informed me that he wouldn't be going. I was stunned and heartbroken, pleading with him to come with me, but he coldly declined. I asked him how I should explain his absence to my parents, and he replied, "Just tell them the truth." I continued to beg and implore him to stay home, but he got dressed, packed a gym bag, and left the house. I'm shattered inside, feeling utterly defeated. I'm turning to this community for advice and guidance on how to save my marriage. I'd especially appreciate hearing from anyone who has experienced something similar with open marriages, and whether it's possible for a couple to recover from such a betrayal. I'm eager to hear from people who have successfully reconciled after an open relationship. Thank you for reading my story. I'm going back to bed now to spend the rest of the day in tears. I'd like to seek advice and guidance from all of you on how I can save my marriage. I'm particularly interested in hearing from those who have faced similar challenges with open marriages and whether it's possible for a couple to heal after such a betrayal. I'm also eager to learn from individuals who have successfully reconciled after experiencing an open relationship. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. I'm going back to bed now to spend the rest of the day in tears. Update. I want to provide an update and express my gratitude to those who responded with feedback and support. Your words have been a source of comfort during these tough days. I also acknowledge and appreciate those who criticize me rightfully, even if it meant using harsh language. The past couple of days, especially Easter Sunday and today, have been exceptionally challenging for me. They rank among the worst days of my life. I drove to my parents' house, and upon arriving, their immediate question was, "Where's James?" To spare our family gathering from disruption, I fabricated a story, explaining that he had a work emergency preventing his attendance. My family accepted my explanation, but suspicions grew as the day progressed due to my unusual lack of communication with my husband. To divert their doubts, I sent a series of fake texts to create the impression of ongoing communication with him, claiming he was still occupied at the office and would call me the following day. In reality, he didn't reach out at all, not even to ensure my safe arrival. This deeply saddened me. My plan was to spend the night at my parents' house and reveal our marital issues to them on Monday, although I dreaded doing so, fully expecting their disapproval and disappointment. This morning, I did exactly as I had planned. As expected, it didn't go well. They raised their voices, used hurtful language, and expressed their disappointment. They claimed they hadn't raised me to make such choices and added various criticisms. I called my sister to join the conversation, and she didn't hold back either. I couldn't help but cry as I apologized to them. I acknowledged the gravity of my actions, expressed my remorse, and assured them that I've learned from this mistake and won't repeat it. I emphasized that my main priority now is to regain James's love and trust. Despite their anger, they eventually told me they loved me and hoped for our marriage to be repaired through prayer. On Monday evening, I drove back home. Throughout the day, I tried calling and texting James, but there was no response. When I returned home, I found a note on the counter informing me that he had gone to Florida to visit his parents and wouldn't return until Sunday. I felt a deep sense of guilt, as we had planned to visit them in early May, and now that plan seemed jeopardized because of my actions. I'm consumed by self-loathing. At this point, I'm just profoundly depressed and sad. What worries me is that I've stopped crying. The pain and regret have sunk so deeply within me that tears no longer provide any relief. Update. It's been almost a year since I last posted, and I didn't plan on sharing more, but the community's interest convinced me to do so. Here's the update, starting with the bad news. I am now divorced. The final papers were signed in December. James decided he couldn't continue our marriage after I was involved with another man. According to him, he could never trust me again, and he felt embarrassed to be seen with me in public. He thought that getting a divorce helped him regain his sense of masculinity. I disagreed, as I believed he never lost it. The only ones who know about my brief connection with Jaden are our families, but I suppose it's his perspective. Now for the good news, or rather, the great news. James and I started dating again last month. We officially got back together on Valentine's Day. And it's been wonderful. We see each other only when he wants, which has been about once a week. But our passion has been incredible, even higher than when we first met 7 years ago. However, James has made it clear that this is purely physical, and we will never be married again, live together, or be a couple. I'm not entirely okay with this, but I'm willing to accept what I can get. My main goal is to win back James, and if that doesn't happen, I would like to have his children. Please don't misunderstand me. I would never try to trap him into parenthood. I just genuinely want to have kids with him. I've thought about how we could share custody and make it work without being married. I know it might sound unconventional, but my love for him is strong, and I don't want to have children with anyone else. I'm aware that this could potentially complicate any future relationships I might have with other men, but James is the one I truly want. That's all I have to share for now, and I probably won't post again unless something significant happens. However, I would greatly appreciate your feedback on my situation. Do you think I'm crazy for continuing to date James? Should I consider moving on and starting a family with someone else instead? P.S. Jaden is not an option and never was. He was a mistake I won't repeat. Thank you for your input.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
I travel for work, moving between 3 different states approximately every week. I spend a week at one job site, then move on to the next, and this can vary depending on the travel date, location, and job duration. I don't have children, and I'm not in a serious relationship. I met a woman named Gina a little over a year ago. She happened to be at a bar that some of my coworkers like to visit after their shifts. I went to buy drinks for our group, and I noticed she was also getting a drink. We struck up a conversation, introducing ourselves, and ended up talking for most of the night. However, we left things at the bar. We had a few more conversations over the course of a month, all at the same bar. Initially, she mentioned that she was divorced and not interested in anything serious. This later evolved into her preferring something casual and fun. Given the nature of my job, which involves a lot of travel and an unpredictable schedule, I agreed to keep things casual. We exchanged phone numbers, and that was the extent of it. Typically, we would meet up around 4 to 8 times a month. Over the past year, most of our encounters took place at the hotel where I stayed during work trips. Gina explained that she lived far away, making me a more convenient and safer option. I didn't have any reason to doubt her, as she was consistently available, spent nights and weekends with me, and wasn't overly attached to her phone. It was a fun and connected experience for us. However, everything changed last night. While we were hanging out and running errands together, we heard someone in a store call out Gina's name. Her demeanor shifted, red flag #1. It turned out to be an old friend of Gina's from work. They exchanged a few words, and when the friend asked about me, I politely introduced myself. Then the friend inquired about how Gina and I knew each other. Gina quickly responded, "He's an old friend from the town she grew up in, red flag #2. Then the lady asked Gina, "What is David up to?" During another uncomfortable moment, red flag #3, Gina mentioned something about David doing fine and being busy with work, but she clearly didn't want to discuss it. David is presumably her ex-husband. They wrapped up the conversation quickly, and I went back to shopping. Once we left the store, I asked her what that was all about. She brushed it off, claiming it was nothing, and that she wanted to move past it, red flag #4. She seemed distant on the way back to the hotel. It was evident that her mind was somewhere else, red flag #5. I inquired if she was okay, and she replied with a curt yes. Then she abruptly ended the evening with a flimsy excuse and left, red flag #6. Initially, she was supposed to see me off this morning. Up until this point, I hadn't considered the possibility that she might have lied about being divorced. I attempted to find her on social media, but couldn't locate her under the name I knew, red flag #7. There was a private account that might have belonged to her, but it had a different last name. Unfortunately, I couldn't investigate further due to the account's privacy settings. I'm currently on my way to a different work site and won't be back for around 15 days. She hasn't responded to my text asking if everything is all right or what's going on. The situation is strange and doesn't feel right. I'm not sure what steps to take. Additionally, I undergo regular testing and have always tested negative for any health concerns. Additional information. I don't believe I can access her phone records. I tried searching her number online, but I didn't find any significant information. I do know where she works, but I'm unsure about her specific department. Her workplace is about a 45-minute drive from our usual meeting place. If I attempt to call, I would need her specific extension, or I'd be routed through an automated phone system. What surprises me is that this was the first time I didn't intentionally make a move or flirt. It felt like the conversation flowed naturally without any awkward moments. I don't think there are multiple people involved in this affair. There might be a husband, possibly named Dave. As I mentioned, she didn't use her phone much or take calls when I was around. She never concealed her phone and was always accessible. If she had multiple partners, I don't think she would have been so comfortable with all of this. I've been cheated on before, which is why I took the job I currently have. And it's also why I made this post. I never wanted to be the person someone cheats with. One challenge I'm facing is that I don't know where she actually grew up. Her dad was in the military and they moved around every couple of years. I'm not sure where she graduated from. However, I do know that she didn't lie about this part. Also, we always met up in the town or somewhere nearby. She mentioned that she never changed her name during the marriage or divorce, and it had something to do with her dad's strong belief in the importance of a last name. Reflecting on it now, there were many red flags that I either didn't investigate or didn't pay much attention to at the time. My mind was usually preoccupied with other pressing matters. I'm still feeling confused and hurt. I'll see what happens when I return and if she disappears. Update. Hello, everyone. I appreciate your comments. They have been helpful. To recap, I frequently travel between 3 different work locations in different states. Over a year ago, I met Gina. We essentially had a friends with benefits arrangement with hints of something more. During our last encounter at a grocery store, a former coworker called her out and asked about David, a name I had no knowledge of. Gina reacted strangely, stopped talking to me, and displayed several red flags. I couldn't find her on social media for some reason, and she essentially cut off contact with me. So I recently returned to our usual meeting spot, the bar. And to my surprise, she was there. I noticed her talking to a guy. When she spotted me, she briefly smiled and then looked concerned. She came over to me, apologized again, and wanted to talk. To sum up our lengthy conversation, she's married to a man named David. She had lied about her last name and blocked me on social media. She explained that she was surprised by her feelings for me and didn't want to hurt me, which is why she initially concealed the truth. It turns out she and David have been married for a decade. However, Gina is what people call a beard. She is straight, and her husband is definitely not. Both their families are extremely religious and traditional. They live together but lead separate lives and have other relationships. Their marriage is essentially a facade, existing only on paper. Most of their family doesn't reside in the same area. David's family is mostly overseas, and they pressured him more towards marriage. Gina's family lives far away, and when they visit, they go separately, making up excuses like work commitments. During family visits, they pretend to be a couple, sharing the master bedroom. Most of their relationships are casual or one-night stands. The person she was talking to at the bar was indeed David, the real David. They provided evidence like IDs with matching addresses and their presence on social media. In our conversation, Gina and I spoke privately initially, and later he joined us, and we had a constructive discussion. He shared his perspective, talked about their history, and shed light on their individual lives and their public facade as a couple. He turned out to be a genuinely nice guy. Gina revealed that initially I was meant to be a one-time encounter, but that one time turned into a second, and then a third. She was afraid that confessing this would harm our connection. She acknowledged that she should have been upfront from the beginning, but was scared to do so. When that woman spotted us, she got nervous about the consequences of their arrangement. For him, it meant losing everything, including possible rejection from his family. Therefore, she promptly blocked me after the incident at the store. This was to prevent me from looking them up and accidentally contacting someone who wasn't aware of their relationship. I'm not much of a social media user. I have accounts but rarely use them. We mainly communicate through text and Snapchat. While I care about her, having to keep our relationship a secret makes me uncertain. I prefer not to worry when I'm out with someone I'm dating and just enjoy our time together. Most of our relationship has been as friends with benefits, but now I feel like I need to be cautious in case a friend or family member sees us together. I'm unsure how our relationship will evolve from here, but thanks for your support.